Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. Louis Silvi Zamperini was born on January 26, 1917, in Torrione, Italy. His family emigrated to the United States when he was a baby and settled in Torrance, California. Growing up in an immigrant family was not easy. Zamperini, who did not speak English in his childhood, was often excluded and bullied by other children at school. This made him a hot-tempered and rebellious child. He was constantly getting into fights and causing trouble. Even his family began to think that he was an uncontrollable child. However, Louis's life changed when his older brother Pete encouraged him to take up athletics. Pete thought he could channel his energy in a positive direction and encouraged him to join the school's track team. Initially reluctant, Zamperini's extraordinary talent for running was soon discovered as he began training. He rapidly developed and became one of the best runners in his school. By high school, he broke the California state record in the 1-mile, 1,600 meters race with a time of 4 minutes 21 seconds. This remarkable achievement made him a nationally recognized young athlete, and everyone believed he would achieve great things in the future. After graduating from high school, Zamperini received a scholarship to the University of Southern California, USC, and continued to take athletics more seriously. In 1936, he qualified for the Olympic Games held in Berlin. For a 19-year-old athlete to qualify for the Olympics at that time was a great achievement. In the 5,000-meter race, Zamperini initially fell behind. However, in the final laps, he put on an extraordinary performance and began closing the gap. In the last lap, he ran an incredible 56 seconds, drawing attention to himself. Although he did not win a medal, it is said that even Adolf Hitler took an interest in his speed and personally shook his hand to congratulate him. After his success at the Olympics, Louis Zamperini's goal was to win a gold medal at the 1940 Tokyo Olympics. However, the world was on the brink of a major change. With the outbreak of World War II, the Olympics were canceled. Zamperini put his athletic career aside and enlisted in the United States Air Force. A completely different kind of war awaited him, not one against his competitors on the track, but a fight for survival. In 1941, Louis Zamperini joined World War II and served as part of the crew of a B-24 Liberator bomber in the United States Air Force. B-24 aircraft were considered some of the largest and most powerful bombers of the time, but they were also difficult to fly and prone to technical malfunctions. Zamperini participated in numerous dangerous reconnaissance and bombing missions in the Pacific Theater. By 1943, Zamperini and his crew were assigned to search for another B-24 bomber that had gone missing near Green Island. However, the plane they were given, an old and defective B-24 nicknamed Green Dragon, was unreliable. Zamperini and his crew knew the aircraft was not trustworthy, but they had to carry out their mission. On May 27, 1943, during the search mission, the plane experienced an engine failure. The pilot and crew tried to control the aircraft, but they quickly lost altitude. Shortly after, the engine completely failed, and the B-24 crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Out of the 11 people on board, only 3 survived: Louis Zamperini, Sergeant Francis Mac McNamara, and pilot Russell Allen Phil Phillips. When the plane hit the water, Zamperini lost consciousness and began sinking rapidly. His foot was trapped in the wreckage and he was nearly drowning underwater. In a final effort, he managed to free himself and surfaced. Together with his 2 surviving companions, he climbed onto a small inflatable raft and managed to survive. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, all they had were 2 small rafts, a little water, and a few chocolate bars. As they waited to be rescued, they had to endure days of hunger, thirst, and shark attacks. For the first few days, they shared a few pieces of chocolate from the emergency rations on the plane to survive. However, Mac made a huge mistake by eating all the chocolate in a panic, which increased the tension and greatly diminished their chances of survival. While roasting under the sun, dehydration became their greatest enemy. In the endless expanse of salty water, they couldn't find a single drop of clean drinking water. When it rained, They tried to survive by collecting water with their hands or shirts. Hungry and exhausted, the three men were constantly attacked by sharks. The sharks circled around their raft, waiting for any chance to strike. Zamperini and his team fought off the sharks with paddles and whatever materials they had. Several times they nearly fell off the raft due to giant waves and storms, but by working together they managed to stay alive. One day an aircraft appeared on the horizon. The three men thought they were going to be rescued, but it turned out to be a Japanese reconnaissance plane. The plane targeted Zamperini and his friends with machine gun fire. The three men dove into the water to protect themselves. Zamperini repeatedly watched as bullets splashed into the water, and by sheer luck, none hit him. Although they managed to escape the gunfire, the raft was riddled with holes and began to take on water. They put in great effort to repair it. Mac couldn't endure the hunger and thirst any longer, and on the 33rd day, he passed away. Zamperini and Phil said a prayer for their friend and let him go into the ocean. By the end of the day, the two exhausted men saw a Japanese warship on the horizon. At first, they thought they were rescued, but the reality was much more horrifying. The Japanese soldiers took them as prisoners of war and transported them to Japanese POW camps in the Pacific. Their struggle for survival did not end there. A far greater nightmare awaited them. Louis Zamperini and Russell Allen, Phil Phillips, who had managed to survive for 47 days in the Pacific Ocean, believed they were finally going to be saved. However, the Japanese warship that appeared was not a sign of rescue, but the beginning of a new nightmare. The soldiers aboard the ship forcibly pulled the two exhausted men aboard and tied their hands. Famished and dehydrated, Zamperini and Phil could barely stand. The Japanese soldiers ruthlessly insulted them, slapped them, and interrogated them. They wanted to know who they were and what mission they had been on. Louis claimed he was just a soldier who had gone missing during a reconnaissance mission, but the Japanese treated them as spies and immediately sent them to a POW camp. They were first taken to a prison on Kwajalein Atoll. This place was known as Execution Island. None of the POWs brought here had ever survived. Zamperini and Phil were locked in small, filthy, dark cells for several weeks. The cells were so narrow they could barely move and were filled with rats. They were only given moldy rice and dirty water to eat. As the days passed, the Japanese soldiers began to torture them mercilessly. They were constantly beaten, starved, and forced to stand for hours under the hot sun. Zamperini was pressured to give information about the U.S. Army, but he never spoke. On some days, the guards would force the prisoners to fight each other for their amusement. Every day, the Japanese officers would tell them they would be killed if they didn't talk. But Zamperini tried to keep his mind strong and not lose his will to survive. He motivated himself by mentally reliving his past races and athletic achievements. After months in Kwajalein in 1944, Zamperini and Phil were taken to Japan. They were placed in a POW camp near Tokyo, in Omori. Omori was a large labor camp for POWs, and the prisoners there were forced to work. However, a much greater nightmare awaited Zamperini here. Mutsuhiro Watanabe, also known as the Bird, Watanabe, was one of the most sadistic and psychopathic guards in the Omori camp. He took pleasure in beating and torturing the prisoners. He particularly targeted the strong, famous, and resilient prisoners, and Zamperini was exactly that type of person. When Watanabe learned that Zamperini was a famous Olympic runner, he became obsessed with him. Every day he beat him, tortured him for hours, and humiliated him. Sometimes, just for amusement, Watanabe would force Zamperini to carry a heavy log for hours. On one occasion, to humiliate him in front of the other prisoners, he ordered that every prisoner take turns hitting Zamperini. If anyone refused, they would be punished. Zamperini endured immense pain every day but never gave up on living. By 1945, the American army was getting closer to Japan. The Japanese began moving the prisoners to more distant camps. Zamperini and some other prisoners were taken to Nakatsu, which was even worse than Omori. There, the prisoners were forced to work in coal mines, starved, and beaten. Zamperini's resistance was slowly wearing down, but he still fought to keep his spirit intact. In August 1945, after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered. The Japanese soldiers had been ordered to kill the prisoners, but due to the American bombings and the end of the war, the prisoners were saved before they could be executed. Zamperini and the other POWs were freed by American soldiers. After 2 years of captivity and torture, the time for freedom had finally come. When he returned to America, he was welcomed as a hero, but another battle awaited him: the trauma of war and the psychological scars. Zamperini would spend years trying to recover from the horrors he had endured, but he would never give up. The darkest moments of Louis Zamperini's life began after he encountered Mutsuhiro Watanabe, a cruel Japanese guard. Watanabe was one of the most feared and infamous guards at the Omori prison camp. His terrifying reputation spread due to his brutal behavior, torture, and psychological pressure. Watanabe's actions went far beyond what any person could endure. He seized every opportunity to intimidate and torment the prisoners in his camp. However, one prisoner was different from the others: Louis Zamperini. Zamperini's capture by the Japanese as a POW only complicated an already difficult situation. As an Olympic runner and famous athlete, he became Watanabe's target. In Watanabe's eyes, Louis's past achievements were a threat. A strong and defiant spirit made him a more valuable target to break. Therefore, the torture Zamperini endured was far more severe. At first, Watanabe was disturbed by Zamperini's athletic abilities. His endurance, the body often subjected to torture, and his mental strength angered Watanabe. Watanabe developed various methods to humiliate and hurt Louis. His goal was to break Louis's honor and morale. Watanabe subjected Louis to daily tortures. To test the prisoner's physical endurance, Watanabe would make Louis stand for hours, beat him, and starve him. These tortures went beyond physical pain, leading to mental and emotional destruction. There were no rules, no limits, no sense of humanity. Watanabe's only goal was to create constant fear and pain. Some of the horrific experiences Louis faced included beaten with paddles. Watanabe repeatedly forced Louis to be beaten with wooden logs. Especially when Louis tried to defend himself, Watanabe would become more violent. One time, Louis's body was swollen and covered with bruises. Terrible loneliness. Many prisoners would support each other to escape Watanabe's cruelty, but Louis's isolation was profound. Watanabe ensured that he would remain alone and subjected to the worst forms of torture: humiliation. Watanabe didn't just physically torture Louis, but also constantly humiliated him psychologically. Several times, Watanabe made other prisoners beat Louis in front of him. This was done to test Louis's endurance and to instill hopelessness in him, physical labor and overwork. Louis was forced to work in physically demanding jobs, working for hours on end. This took a heavy toll on the physical endurance that had once supported his athletic success. One day, when he was shamefully forced to work in a mud pit, he clearly saw Watanabe's deep hatred for him. Despite all the brutal tortures, Louis Zamperini's spirit was never completely broken. Although he became physically weakened by the external violence, he never lost the moral strength and resilience within him. Despite Watanabe's psychological pressure and constant humiliation, Louis's mental resistance remained high. Dreams of Olympic races. Louis constantly dreamed of running in the Olympics. Over time, thinking about his past races and achievements gave him the strength to forget the physical pain. Every night he would return to his races in his mind, developing a form of psychological resistance to the suffering. Moments of self-defense. On one occasion, Louis made a final attempt to defend himself against a physical attack by Watanabe. This move gave him a few minutes of relief and a sense of freedom. However, the cost was steep. Watanabe became even more brutal. As Watanabe's torture continued, Louis's mental resilience only grew stronger. While many prisoners collapsed mentally under Watanabe's fear, Louis stood up stronger after every blow. His survival was not only about physical endurance but also about mental strength. This revealed Louis's true power and warrior spirit. Watanabe's Cruelty never broke Louis's resolve. With every new blow, Louis achieved an inner victory against the guard trying to break his morale. As each day passed, Watanabe's efforts to destroy Louis's spirit only strengthened his resistance. The torture continued, but Louis, in the post-war period, tried to heal by overcoming the psychological effects of the torment. He discovered the power of forgiveness and letting go. In the 1950s, when he went to Japan to face Watanabe, he told him that he had forgiven him from the bottom of his heart. This was a turning point for Louis, as it helped him find inner peace and accept the pain of his past. In August 1945, one of the world's most horrific wars came to an end. Japan surrendered, and World War II officially ended. However, for Louis Zamperini and the other POWs, freedom came suddenly and unexpectedly. With Japan's surrender, the American forces began to free the prisoners of war. Zamperini had survived years of torture and starvation in Japanese POW camps like Omori and Nakatsu. Each passing day tested his endurance, but with each test he grew stronger. Though his body was exhausted, his spirit never gave up. When he was freed, it was hard to believe that he was alive. But one thing was certain: he was free. When Zamperini was released by the American soldiers, his first feeling was shock and confusion. He had lived in POW camps for so long and had struggled to survive in those conditions that he had reached a point where he had forgotten what freedom truly meant. Slowly, the prisoners began to recover, receiving food and drink from the Japanese soldiers. They embraced each other and gave thanks for their survival. However, the physical recovery process was long and difficult. Years of hunger, torture, and forced labor had left Louis's body weak. But with his natural strength and survival instincts, he began to recover quickly. Despite this, he realized that another battle had begun within him: emotional wounds and war trauma. When Zamperini returned to America, he was greeted like a great hero. The press made headlines about his survival as a POW and his courage. People admired him more and more as they heard his story. He was welcomed as a hero and embraced by his family with great love. However, despite all the attention and affection, from the outside world he could not find inner peace. The psychological trauma and mental collapse Louis experienced after the war often went unnoticed. He appeared strong, brave, and like a warrior on the outside, but he was fighting an inner battle. The horrors of the war still left deep wounds in his mind and heart. Nightmares, fears, and bursts of anger became part of his life. Louis had experienced severe trauma due to the tortures and suffering he endured. He began having nightmares and often relived his years of captivity and the torture. He had trouble sleeping at night and would wake up with terrifying bursts of anger. He began to live in restlessness and psychological emptiness. Alcohol became an escape for him from this dark world, but it only made him feel more isolated. When Zamperini returned to America, he was reunited with his family and his girlfriend Cynthia, but escaping from his old traumas was never easy. His marriage was going through a difficult time because of these traumas. Louis could not explain the horrific experiences he had lived through to his wife, and was left alone with his inner struggles. Communication between the couple gradually weakened. Cynthia noticed the changes in her husband. Louis's outbursts of anger, alcohol addiction, and his constant preoccupation with the past were making their marriage harder. Louis was emotionally drained and carried no hope for the future. He felt like a loser. A turning point in Louis's life came in 1949 when he attended a meeting about Christianity. The famous preacher Billy Graham was speaking about forgiveness, urging people to forgive. At first, Louis rejected this message, but over time, he began to understand the power of forgiveness and spiritual healing. Billy Graham's sermon triggered a change in Louis's heart. He decided to let go of his inner pain and traumas. One of his biggest traumas was the anger he felt toward Watanabe, the bird. Zamperini decided to forgive the Japanese guard. Years of hatred and anger were replaced with inner peace through forgiveness. With the power of forgiveness and spiritual healing, Louis began to rebuild himself. Not only did he break free from the ghosts of the past, but he also found a sense of meaning in surviving. Louis embarked on a new journey to build a new life. He became a good family man and a respected member of society. Despite the physical and psychological scars left by the war, Louis continued to contribute to his community as a hero. Forgiveness gave his life meaning and ultimately set him spiritually free. After hearing Billy Graham's sermon, Zamperini decided to embark on a lifelong journey of faith. Although the pains of the war had left their mark, he had now left his past behind and became a source of inspiration for others. He had freed himself from the lasting effects of the war and captivity, finding spiritual peace. Louis Zamperini struggled greatly to deal with the traumas and physical pains he experienced after the war. His alcohol addiction became a dark stain in his life. The psychological trauma brought on by the war, nightmares, outbursts of anger, and a sense of inner emptiness led Louis into one of the hardest times of his life. He drank for days, losing himself in alcohol, trying to forget all the pain he had endured. However, alcohol never brought him true peace. Like many other former prisoners of war, Louis's deep wounds grew over time. The traumas, years of starvation, torture, and fear had isolated him. At the same time, his relationship with his family was deteriorating. While he struggled with communication problems with his wife, Cynthia, Louis's soul was in a deep collapse. As he tried to heal physically, Louis was slowly dying inside, day by day. One of the biggest turning points in Louis's life came when he attended a Billy Graham sermon in 1949. Graham was urging people to forgive, find spiritual peace, and confront their inner pain. At first, Louis didn't take this message seriously, but over time he realized that this belief in the idea of forgiveness might bring him relief. He decided to confront his past and forgive his former guard, Watanabe. The process of faith and forgiveness was a difficult journey for Louis. It wasn't easy to forget the horrors of the war and the years of torture. But Louis, believing in the power of forgiveness and healing, decided to let go of the hatred within him. This not only provided him with psychological relief, but also led to a spiritual awakening. One of the things he learned while fighting for survival was that true freedom comes from one's capacity for forgiveness in their own heart. By deeply understanding the meaning of forgiveness and letting go of his anger and pain, Louis found a form of spiritual freedom. He no longer wanted to live under the shadow of the past, but focused only on the present and the future. Through forgiveness, he had freed not only his former guards, but also himself. One of the most emotional moments of Louis's life came in 1998 when he traveled to Japan. He decided to go and deliver a message of true forgiveness to the surviving Japanese guards, particularly to Watanabe. Louis wanted to show these individuals that he had truly forgiven them and leave behind a message of humanity. He believed this was the way to fully leave behind the painful memories of the war. Zamperini's journey to Japan was a historic moment for both himself and the world. Louis, who had once seen these former guards as enemies and had lived for years with hatred, chose the path of forgiveness through healing his soul. This journey was not only a personal victory for Louis, but also served as an example for all of humanity. Before traveling to Japan, Louis had already completed the process of forgiveness. However, the meetings and heartfelt words of forgiveness he shared, there became some of the most meaningful moments of his life. As he faced Watanabe and other former guards, he realized that the anger and desire for vengeance within him had vanished. In many ways, this was the moment he truly found freedom. Louis's life was reshaped by the power of forgiveness. After deciding to leave behind the pain of war, his healing process accelerated. His relationships with his family improved, and the anger and pain inside him were replaced by peace and love. Louis finally began to live a more meaningful and peaceful life. His story became inspiring not only because of his fight for survival, but also because of the process of finding inner peace and forgiveness. Louis's transformation touched not only his life, but also the lives of others. He gave people a deep message about overcoming difficulties, forgiving, and finding spiritual peace. Louis Zamperini passed away in 2014 at the age of 97. In the final years of his life, he managed to live a peaceful and meaningful life beyond the pain brought by war and captivity, he found peace not just by surviving but by forgiving. His life story was one that journeyed from the darkest times of war to a place of peace and inner freedom. Even after his death, Zamperini continued to inspire people worldwide. His life demonstrated both the horrors of war and how, through forgiveness and discovering one's inner strength, people could overcome adversity. Lewis would be remembered not just as a hero, but as someone who explored the deepest meanings of being human. Louis Zamperini had transformed from an Olympic athlete to a war hero, and as a spiritual leader, became a figure who inspired millions. His story was not just about survival, but also about how true freedom and peace are achieved through forgiveness. Louis's life became a legend, showing what one can achieve through inner strength. The challenges Louis Zamperini faced were not just a fight for survival, but also a journey that taught humanity an important lesson. Until the final moments of his life, he was a leader on the path of love, forgiveness, and finding inner peace.